Hello and welcome to Little Golem TV. This is, for a change, FatPhil, doing some narration of another Dots and Boxes game, again from Championship 28. As you know, the result of this has already been decided. One game that I thought was quite interesting was the one between JJ10 and aldiris, both of whom are fairly strong players. I wouldn't pretend to be able to understand everything that's going through their minds as they're choosing their moves, but I think their game was one that shows some interesting, possibly gambles or possibly a great foresight, and I think has a very interesting ending. Well, W.C. Kennard always used to say to me that basically you can choose 5 random moves at the start of the game, and the game can turn out either way. It can turn into an odd number or an even number of long chains. So I won't pretend that analysing the first moves it really tells you that much about the future shape of the game, although sometimes you can tell there are some obvious, I'm going to try and make a quick chain here, or I'm going to try and stop you using a corner of the board for chains. Those types of suggestions are possible early on. So the first move is a fairly standard one. For player 1, it's looking for 2 chains. It's entirely possible that little zone at the bottom will never turn into a chain. It's very easy to turn it into a little short chain of 2. Move 2, again, fairly non-committal, no shape really forming. Move 3, it looks as if the bottom left might become a zone on its own, but again it's too early to say. Well, move 4 actually is where it starts to get a little bit interesting, because this is a fairly common shape that you'll see from player 2. Putting those 2 parallel lines is a bit of an indication that player 2 wants a long chain across the bottom of the board. Of course, it's a very easy target for a quick blowing up if player 1 wants to separate the bottom left and the bottom right at cost of only 1. But normally you see this kind of thing growing early on as just as an indication that player 2 wants to have 3 chains in the game. Move 5. JJ not particularly perturbed by that. It does look like the board is clearly splitting from the northwest to the southeast a bit. I would be very surprised if the northwest corner ended up connected to the southeast corner. So that's hinting at least 2 long chains. At the moment it's very easy to just drop a line to the edge and make sure that you don't get a loop. But the remaining area in the top right, so big that there's plenty of room for a 3rd chain still. So again, as WC implies, it's too early to judge. Fairly predictable continuation of that potential chain along the bottom from aldiris. Now this is quite a clever move. JJ's saying, if you're going to be building one along the bottom, I'm going to possibly make it go into the top right. So a threat to reduce the number of chains to 2. And aldiris is unperturbed by that. He probably thinks that he can create another region, and it's very easy to just kill one of those single boxes at the moment and split the board somewhere. Move 9, is JJ trying to start connecting the top left to the bottom left? It's hard to know. There's so much free space in the top right that it's quite tense probably for both players. They don't know exactly how many chains there will be at the end of the game. Again, this is just extending the shape that we've already got at the bottom, but it doesn't oblige it to take on any particular structure. It's beginning to look a little bit more like a 6 loop. Now JJ's move here really starts to make it look like a 6 loop is possible. But it's very easy to prevent. Just a quick sacrifice, or just redirecting it up. Again, not yet decided, but Loops always make games interesting, and in fact the reason I chose this game to comment on is the fact that the loops do make things very interesting. A loop down there would probably favour JJ. It would probably leave the board with 2 long chains, which favours player 1. So aldiris here looks like he's trying to reduce the number of chains, possibly create a loop right up at the top. Normally if you start drawing lines around the edges, you're stopping endpoints for chains. But then again, this might just be another way of joining the top left with the top right. Easily prevented, and there's no reason to make any hasty moves by either player at the moment. Okay, finally we do have a real long chain. It's one that can be terminated at either end, or both ends, very easily. So we've got to look at the rest of the board now. The top right and the bottom right, there are 2, or the whole bottom, 2 clear zones that are of interest. It does look like, again, still, like it's favouring player 1. If the bottom becomes a loop, then it'll probably end up as 2 chains. If the bottom is redirected up towards the top and it merges, then again it's probably going to be 2 chains. There's still room for another chain squeezed down the right hand side, for example, but it would require both players to cooperate to build that, and would be very easy to prevent. So at the moment it looks like JJ10 is going to win the long chain battle. Move 14 is quite a curious one. There's kind of a double-edged threat of merging that top square with either the chain on the left or possibly with whatever's going to be created on the right. Probably gives JJ10 plenty to think about. Does he want them connected? If it's going to disrupt his victory of the long chain battle, possibly not. And we see his immediate reaction is just to stop any possible joining immediately. So we've got a fairly clearly defined region in the top left. The top right is getting interesting too, because whilst there's room for a chain up there, even if the bottom is separated off as a loop 6, it's actually becoming quite easy for the top to gain another 4 loop, and possibly no long chains at all, which would turn it into a 1 long chain result, which would favour aldiris, assuming there aren't too many sacrifices. And in fact, it's beginning to look like it's going to be quite hard to incorporate that middle area in its own long chain unless both players cooperate. It's very easy to either turn it into a loop or to merge it with whatever is being built in the bottom of the board. So aldiris takes the gift of the sacrifice that has defined the shape and starts to hint more strongly that he wants a loop down at the bottom. He can turn the top into a loop with just 1 move, and then have to just fight off small chains if he wants. Similarly, he can turn it into a chain if he wants. This applies to both players, obviously. But the state of that lower potential 6 loop isn't yet decided. It could become a long chain. If somebody sacrifices 1 box at the bottom in the middle, it's a long chain, and there's nothing that can be done to stop one of the players from making it separate from the chain on the left. So it's very easy to force 2 long chains plus whatever happens in the top right. Were this to happen, I suspect that aldiris would quickly try and form a 3rd long chain by playing horizontally in the middle of that little potential loop up in the top right. which would create a third long chain immediately. So in some ways, perhaps JJ is on his back foot here and won't want to be sacrificing to create a long chain at the bottom. But that, of course, obliges him to attempt a long chain in the top right. And as you see, he takes that quite seriously, forces the loop, but now he has to create a second chain. Move 18, quite predictable. I like this move from aldiris mostly because I think loops make the game much more interesting. They push the responsibility onto analysis of, in some ways, the short chain battle, but also the sacrifices. Once you've got loops, suddenly a long chain battle can become almost worthless or completely worthless. And the short chain battle, of course, can make a worthless long chain battle worth up to -2 points for you. So you've got to be careful about sacrificing. You don't want to waste too many squares just to win the long chain battle. So I think this is where the game becomes a little bit desperate for JJ, but it's not all lost at all. And so to move 19. Now this one, I didn't really understand the reasons behind it. It looked from here that just sacrificing that single square on the right hand side would prevent any long chains on the right, so the long chain battle would be effectively over. There would be one long chain favouring aldiris in theory, but the long chain would have length somewhere between 8 and 5 if it wasn't sacrificed early. Of course, if there's enough sacrificing going on elsewhere, it can be beneficial to blow up a long chain early to make it more costly for the opponent to keep control. But a length 8 chain formed from the entire left hand side would make the long chain battle only worth 2. Length 6 one would make it only worth 0. So not really worth sacrificing for if that's how things are going to turn out. If it's length 5 or 7, then the value would be 1. So again, something that could be negated just by clever use of short chains. So not necessarily worth sacrificing to win the long chain battle. And so to move 20, and here we see aldiris does not panic at all. He's not in a rush to sacrifice. He appreciates that the long chain battle is not going to be necessarily particularly valuable, so he's prepared to just bide his time and keep building the loops. Just wait to see what JJ is going to do. Well, JJ does indeed want the extra long chain. It's not guaranteed, but it'll cost 2. In fact, in total it'll cost 3 to prevent it, because after doing this there'll need to be another sacrifice in the top right to prevent a long chain. But no sacrifice, no blowing up. The parity of the long chain battle has now swung to JJ's favour, player 1. However, because the new chain is a 4 chain, it doesn't actually affect the value of the long chain battle at all. So it could have value 0. And we see in move 22 that aldiris indeed isn't willing to sacrifice 2 squares to prevent there from being a long chain here. He's effectively handing JJ10 the long chain battle, saying, I don't think it's going to be worth much. Being a 4 chain that's been created on the right, well, potentially. The the value of the long chain battle won't have changed. And if the chain on the left ends up being 6 squares long, which isn't hard to imagine, then the value of the long chain battle will in fact be 0, and that would favour aldiris, possibly looking like he has the upper hand now. Now this is a good way to prevent the left-hand chain from being 6 squares long. It'll now either be, well, it'll now be 7 or 8, which would make the long chain battle worth 1 or 2. So a little bit of a kind of a rescue move just for a couple of extra points, possibly, which could be vital in such a close game. And aldiris clamps the chain to be maximum length 7, so the long chain battle probably will have value 1. There'll be 2 short chains, a 1 and a 2, so the short chain battle will have value 1. So effectively the points will get divided equally, and aldiris is currently 1 square ahead. So this pretty much looks like aldiris has the game in the bag now. The only question to ask is whether some sacrifices could change things. But even then, the laws of mathematics prove that at least half of the remaining squares will go to aldiris, and as he has the 1 square already, if he plays perfectly, will end up with 13. So the victory is aldiris's now. So it's just a formality from now on. So just finishing off the chains. So that's the shape of the game finally decided. Long chain battle worth 1, short chain battle worth 1, so everything's equal. So aldiris is going to win 12-13 with perfect play from both players. This presumably is just futility setting in. The correct move at this point is to double cross. The remaining board is worth 5, so it's not worth taking 4 and giving away 5. But as the game is effectively decided, perhaps this was just to speed things up. Maybe they were having a little bit of a chit-chat about the game and didn't want to just resign. And so aldiris loses the long chain battle, but due to clever building of loops and clever management of the short chain battle and sacrifices, is victorious in the end. And I do like those kinds of games. I find them the most interesting. Loops are a terrific weapon to help confuse and confound the opponent, and I think aldiris used them very well here. Anyway, thanks for listening. Hopefully I'll be able to produce some others, and I hope others will be willing to contribute commentaries of their favourite games as well. So this is FatPhil signing off, and I'll see you on the website. Cheerio.